Now, the African Development Bank recently commissioned its Nigeria Country Department office in Abuja. The 220-capacity four-story building signals the bank's deeper engagement with Nigeria, its principal shareholder since inception. CNBC Africa's Markets Editor for West Africa, Kenneth Igbomor, caught up with Ebrima Faal, the African Development Bank's director of the Nigeria Country Office, and discussed the African Development Bank's partnership with Nigeria.
The building actually goes back to about 2009. The bank started a decentralization program in which the bank made a decision to move closely or closer to its clients. So that process started out with a few countries, Nigeria being one of them. And we started out in Lagos at the time in 1971 with 5 staff members, a very small office, very small operations, less than 5 million, I think at the time was the lending that we had in the country. But over time, clearly, the significance of Nigeria as the #1 economy in the continent, the most populous also, and also the most politically influential country. But more importantly for us, Nigeria is the largest shareholder of the African Development Bank. That's critically important. And critically important also, Nigeria provides a third window, lending window for the bank, called the Nigeria Trust Fund. So it was a natural decision to think of Nigeria when the decision was being made.
I want you to speak to the thinking that went through putting this building together.
Yes. The building was conceived in 2009. At that time, a decision was made by the board of directors that we should own buildings in places where we are decentralizing. It took quite a number of years, about 5 to 6 years, to put all the designs and all of the tendering together. So the design was won by a Nigerian company called Interstate Architects. They did the design of the building. The building is incredibly sophisticated. It's a smart building. It's an environmentally sound building with a lot of features that embraces the future in terms of solar heating, solar lighting. We also have, for example, even in terms of anticipating the future, which is electric cars. So when you go to the parking lot, you'll find ports where you can actually charge your electric car. So these are all forward-looking things with the environment and sustainability in mind.
Okay, so beyond brick and mortar right now,
yeah.
I want you to speak to how this would deepen Nigeria's role with the African Development Bank.
Yes, Nigeria, our program at the moment in Nigeria ranges between 5.5 billion to 6 billion a year. The total portfolio. An annual program ranging anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion a year. So that's a large portfolio. The Nigeria active portfolio alone is larger than the bank's portfolio in most of the regions, if you take the average of the region. So that's a large engagement. And I think while the decision was made to choose Nigeria, it also now coincides with the fact that it is the most important in terms of portfolio, of course, together with South Africa and some of the North African countries. This particular building is also crucial in terms of the regional integration agenda of the bank. As you know, our charter enshrines regional integration in there. Together, the bank, together with Nigeria and ECOWAS, I think will really move the regional integration agenda forward. We already are doing a lot in that space, but we know that more can be done, and I think this office is also going to be quite instrumental in pushing that agenda forward.
So looking at how Nigeria has been engaging with the bank over the years, I know there's a Nigeria Trust Fund for the bank. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an update on that fund and how that has been the history?
Yes, the Nigeria Trust Fund was established in 1976 by the Nigerian government, At the time, it was around the time that oil prices were beginning to really escalate quite a bit, and Nigeria was making quite a bit of rent from that. Nigeria recognized the hardships that other African countries were going through because of the higher oil prices at the time, and also the difficulties of having development spending in those countries. So Nigeria established a trust fund that is still managed by the bank to assist those countries, both in terms of their own individual development programs, but also as a region, to see what regional projects can be supported through the Nigeria Trust Fund. That fund has now grown to over 500 million, and it has implemented hundreds of projects across the continent. So it's a very important window of the bank. Yeah.
So it's good to hear Nigeria playing the big brother.
Yeah, and not only in the financing space, what associated with the Nigerian Trust Fund is what we call the Nigeria Technical Capacity Fund. And that fund, as the name implies, also it's a smaller fund of 25 million, but it supports capacity building in the member countries of the African Development Bank. So yes, Nigeria is is taking quite a leadership role in terms of the African Development Bank.
Okay, so now let's look now at the project pipelines we have in Nigeria.
Yes.
How the bank has been cooperating with Nigeria.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you speak to the project in the pipeline over the years and what we're expecting to see going forward?
The current active portfolio of Nigeria is about $5.5 billion. And it's divided almost 50-50 between lending to the public sector and lending to the private sector. In the public sector, of course, we've supported the usual infrastructure projects, roads, agriculture, human development, capital development, education, etc. Whereas in the private sector, we have been able to support through lines of credits mostly, lending to SMEs. As you know, most of the jobs that have been created through the SME window. So we provided a lot of lines of credits to many banks in Nigeria to on-lend now to the SMEs. That has been one large activity. In the private sector also, we have supported some very important life-changing projects. One that comes to mind is the Lekki Toll Road. I think that before the Lekki Toll Road was built, people had to wake up around 4 o'clock, to try to get to the center in Lagos. We think it's an important project that has actually changed lives, because I think people can now go to work much later and then get home also much earlier than they could have without the toll road. There's also the Indorama fertilizer project, which was also financed by the bank. And in fact, that has been so successful that we are now considering this year a second loan to Indorama to expand their fertilizer operations to the rest of the African continent.
Okay, it's a good one you're talking about projects coming up in the pipeline, because that's where actually I'm going next.
Yes, okay.
Because I just want you to talk about what your program is like with Nigeria going into the year. It's a new year, so it's good to get some introspection into how you're planning to approach it.
We just completed our 3-year rolling program. So for 2018, most of our lending will be in 2 areas, in the power sector, both generation and transmission, but also providing policy-based support to the power sector to inform, to work with the government, partner with the government to implement the power reform program. There are quite a number of solar projects that we are working on with other partners as well, World Bank. And one of the larger ones, I think, is the Kwa Ibo power project, which is almost about 800 million. The bank is financing about 136 million of that, and we hope to leverage another 600-700 million to complete that project. We also have in the private sector a small but very important project called the Santa Clara Clinic, which is a world-class clinic that's being built in Lagos to provide world-class medical service to Nigerians. That's in the pipeline for this year, as well. We also have some agro-based industrial processing. It's one thing to produce, for example, cassava, But if you don't transform it into something else, whether it's flour or bread or something, you're really not adding that value upstream. So there's a line of credit also that would allow processors to borrow from that line of credit to do cassava processing. So these are some of the projects that we have this year.
Interesting. The next line I would like to look at is, last year we saw the big buzz about the high fives at the bank. I would like to know how you're cooperating with the present government in Nigeria to help move the
high five agenda. Even our current country strategy partnership document with Nigeria focuses a lot on in the high five areas already. We are now in the process of working with the government and other stakeholders to come up with a new strategy for the next 5 years. Now, anchoring that strategy is going to be the government's own ERGP document, which came out last year. So what we do in country always has to be demand driven. So that's our starting point. So we take that document and we see how aligned it is to our high fives, and it is almost completely aligned. So we anticipate that we will be working together with the government to expedite, to help expedite the implementation of that program, and also in the process agree with them what projects are of national significance that they would want us to be engaged with them. Of course, the same thing applies to the private sector. They don't have to go through government, but the fact that we are doing 50% of our engagement in country with the private sector, we will look at the areas where there's going to be impact. So in the power sector, in agriculture, in developing agribusinesses. We are particularly proud to be pushing the special crop processing zones concept as a means of ensuring rural transformation in African countries. It's a neat concept in that it brings to these rural areas of prosperity where you can design and have the whole ecosystem as it was. Power, infrastructure, water, and of course supporting farmers that produce. So you really are developing and empowering those regions to create jobs.
That was Ebrima Faal, the director of the Nigeria Country Office of the African Development Bank. As we continue our discussion on the African Development Bank's partnership with Nigeria, we now look at the bank's non-lending initiatives and how they can help Nigeria solve some peculiar issues facing the country.
That's a very important part of our work that we actually don't talk about too much, the non-lending program. But the knowledge work that we have been doing in the bank, we try to leverage that in support of and advising the countries wherever we go. I think the Hasman problem in Nigeria clearly has its roots in terms of the migratory patterns of how herding used to be done in the past, very extensive. Across very extensive areas. We believe, like I said to you earlier, that the special crop processing zones, if we develop that concept, which I think the government has already signed on to and have developed the policies, we should be able to find solutions for addressing some of these issues.
So next, I would like to move on to the voting power within the member countries at the bank. How does Nigeria sit, and how do we see this going forward?
Yeah, Nigeria is the single largest shareholder of the bank at the moment, with a voting power of approximately 9%. It has been since I think the bank was formed, and that is likely to continue in the near term. The composition of the shareholding is such that I think the African constituency holds almost 2/3 of the vote, and then the non-regionals about 1 to 1/3 of the vote. But as you know, in other institutions, there has been a lot of call to increase voice and participation. We have not seen strong sort of sentiments towards that yet in the bank. But clearly, when you look at the traditional shareholders, and the increasing role of non-traditional shareholders, the Chinas, the Brazils, Turkey is now a member of the bank, etc. We're seeing a lot of interest from others. Ireland, for example, is another country. A few years ago, Australia also was keen to join the bank. So new members also have a way of changing the structure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So then I'd like you to speak about how Nigeria specifically can feed itself. And I'd like you to speak to the role of power in the whole gamut, and how this will help Nigeria achieve its objectives.
Yeah. I think one of the most important work that has been done in this space was the agricultural transformation agenda that was done a few years ago, in fact, by our former Minister of Agriculture. I think it established such a comprehensive program for agriculture in Nigeria. And one of the things that it focused on was to move agriculture along the value chain, from downstream all the way to upstream processing. And in doing so also reduce, for example, the foreign import bill of Nigeria, which is in the billions of dollars, right? And of course, in a situation where foreign exchange is scarce, it's a very important consideration. In Nigeria, you can almost grow anything. and Nigeria is among the top 5 to top 10 in any crop, most of the tropical crops that you're looking at, from tomatoes, cassava, etc. What is lacking really is the upstream processing of this into more value added and more sort of significant products to create jobs. And this is where I think the bank has been partnering with Nigeria to move it from just production to actually processing some of that agriculture as well. Tremendous amount of jobs will be created, and tremendous amount of foreign exchange will also be saved.
So how's that, the partnership on value addition, how's that played out so far?
I think it has played out well. You know much more than I do, for example, the story of cassava. Flour, the use of that in making bread and other cassava-based products. We've also seen, for example, tomatoes, where now I think some of the tomatoes are now being processed into tomato paste here in Nigeria rather than being sent abroad. I understand that there's also some efforts to try to process ginger processing rather than just exporting the raw product. We've seen many flour mills, many rice mills coming into play as well. So I think the process is really getting entrenched, and the bank is looking for even better solutions around the special crop processing zones. You're right, the problem of power is a real one, and in fact across the continent we believe that unless the power issue is addressed, the industrialization agenda, which is also a very important part of the high fives, would actually not take off the way that we want it to take off. So addressing the power issue up front, I think, is quite important.
So I want you to also speak to the role of Nigeria and how we can improve collaboration with other countries within the West Africa region and the continent as a whole.
Yeah, well, Nigeria is a leader. It's a leader, however you define it, by any metric: population, size of the land, the intellect of the people, education. The same thing with the resource endowment of Nigeria. So it has a strong voice internationally. Of course, it has a strong voice in Africa itself. We've seen examples, for example, the crisis in the Gambia, how that was averted with the help of Nigeria. But Nigeria plays a leadership role in West Africa because it comprises more than 50% of West Africa's GDP. That is significant. In terms of connectivity, we are beginning to see projects from our side. For example, the Lagos to Dakar highway that is under consideration as an important regional project. it's a means of opening up the Nigerian market to other West African countries and other West African countries to Nigeria. There's also a collaboration in the West African Power Pool, where the power pool is set up so that when you have excess power in one country and you have a deficit in another, you can then trade in power. These are all important things. We need to do that also in the financial space. But these are all important things that will make the region more integrated, and it cannot be without Nigeria taking that leadership role. So it is quite crucial. Okay.
Finally, I'd like to get your outlook for the rest of the year. Nigeria is going into an election year. You know, we know that it's not a time where a lot of investors sit back and do the wait and see approach. But I would like to get your outlook for the rest of the year and how you think, you know, things will play out, you know, regarding the future of agriculture and development and inflow of funds into the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it has been very positive in 2017. We saw both consumer confidence and investor confidence both picking up again. We've seen growth, I think, for 2017. I understand it's estimated around 1.2, 1.3%. And for 2018, we will be launching our Africa Economic Outlook tomorrow, actually. But we do see that trend in terms of the economy recovering, picking up to maybe around 2.2, 2.3. Of course, there's a lot of downside risk, you know, to any forecast at the moment. The elections, as you mentioned, is an important consideration, and how that plays out. Another important consideration, of course, is what happens in the Delta area, but also what happens in the Northeast. So these are all downside risks to a very sort of nascent recovery, if you wish, because still growing around 2.3, 2.4, let's say, if that happens this year, but with significant downside risk. Three of those are the elections, activities in the Delta region, and also activities in the Northeast. But we're hoping for the best, and hoping that the country can get back to where it was a few years back, growing above 5%.
That was Ebrima Faal, the director of the Nigeria Country Office of the African Development Bank, the AfDB.